The air in Blackwood Penitentiary for women always carried the same sterile, metallic scent, a mixture of industrial-grade bleach and quiet desperation. In the pre-dawn gloom of a humid Georgia September, that scent felt heavier, clinging to the damp air like a shroud. For Officer Daniels, a rookie guard barely old enough to buy his own beer, the 5 a.m. rounds were a monotonous ritual. The silence of the cell block was a living thing, broken only by the rhythmic jangle of keys on his belt and the soft squeak of his rubber-soled boots on the polished concrete. It was a silence that promised another day just like the last. Until it didn't. Cell 1137 was supposed to be just another stop. Inmate Imani Jackson, 32 years old, serving a 7-year stretch for financial fraud. A quiet one mostly. Kept to herself, read books, never caused trouble. Daniels rapped his knuckles on the steel bars, the sound sharp and intrusive in the quiet. "Jackson, rise and shine." There was no response. The figure on the bunk, a mere lump under a thin gray blanket, remained perfectly still. A flicker of annoyance, not concern, crossed Daniel's face. He rapped again, louder this time. "Jackson, on your feet!" Still nothing. A cold knot began to tighten in his stomach. He fumbled for the key, his hands suddenly slick with sweat. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo down the entire block. He pushed the heavy door inward. The air inside was colder than the hallway. Imani lay on her side, facing the wall. Daniels reached out and touched her shoulder. The contact was electric, horrifying. Her body was rigid, unnaturally cold through the thin fabric of her jumpsuit. He snatched his hand back as if burned. His breath caught in his throat, a ragged, panicked gasp. He fumbled for his radio, his voice cracking as he spoke the words that would shatter the morning's routine. "Code Blue, C Block, Cell 1137. I need medical now." Within 20 minutes, the calculated calm of Blackwood had evaporated. The cell was sealed, a grim island of yellow tape in a sea of gray concrete. The prison doctor, a weary man named Peterson, made the official pronouncement, time of death, estimated between midnight and 2 a.m. Detective Marcus Vance of the Atlanta Police Department's Homicide Division arrived just as the sun began to burn away the morning mist, casting long, distorted shadows across the prison yard. Vance was a man built of sharp angles and quiet intensity. His presence in the rural Georgia jurisdiction was an anomaly, a favor called in by the state due to the sensitive nature of an in-custody death. As he stepped out of his unmarked sedan, he felt the familiar weight of eyes on him. He was a black detective from the city, stepping onto the turf of a rural, predominantly white prison system. The air was thick with more than just humidity. It was thick with suspicion. He was met at the gate by Warden Evelyn Reed. She was a woman who seemed carved from granite. Her salt and pepper hair pulled back so tightly, it seemed to stretch the skin over her sharp cheekbones. Her pantsuit was immaculate, her expression a carefully constructed mask of professional concern. "Detective Vance," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We've secured the scene." As she led him through a labyrinth of buzzing gates and clanging doors, Vance felt the atmosphere shift. The guards watched him with flat, unreadable expressions. Reed's commentary was clipped, efficient, and dismissive. "Jackson was a model inmate on paper," she stated, as if reading from a file. "But you know how it is. These women, they bring their troubles in with them. We suspect an overdose. She had a history, you know. It's a tragic but, frankly, not uncommon end in a place like this." The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and pointed. These women, a place like this? Vance knew the code. She was telling him this was just another dead black woman, a statistic, a file to be closed quickly and quietly. Inside the cell, the scene was unsettlingly pristine. Forensic techs were dusting for prints, their movements precise and practiced. But there was little for them to find. Imani Jackson lay on her bunk, her body now covered by a sheet. Vance pulled it back gently. There were no obvious signs of violence, no marks of a struggle. But as he leaned closer, his trained eye caught something the initial examiners had missed. Faint, almost imperceptible petechial hemorrhages dotted her eyelids, tiny red flags signaling asphyxiation. And on her neck, hidden in the soft hollow beneath her ear, was a cluster of faint, bluish bruises, so subtle they could have been a shadow. Then he saw the other detail. the one that made the hair on his arms stand up. The thin wool blanket was pulled up to her chin, her hands resting peacefully at her sides. But the sheet beneath it was perfect, taut, creaseless, with crisp military corners. It wasn't the sheet of someone who had died in their sleep, peacefully or otherwise. It was the sheet of a bed that had been carefully, deliberately made, with the body still in it. "Warden," Vance said, his voice low and even, "you said you suspect an overdose?" "That's the prevailing theory, yes," Reed replied, her arms crossed. Vance looked from the perfectly tucked sheet to the faint marks on Imani's neck. He met the warden's cold, gray eyes. "My theory," he said slowly, "is that someone in your prison is a murderer." A silence fell over the cell, heavier and more menacing than any locked door. Warden Reed's mask of composure didn't slip, but for the first time, a flicker of something, annoyance, or perhaps even fear, danced in the depths of her eyes. The quiet war for the truth of what happened in cell 1137 had just begun. The Fulton County morgue was a world away from the humid air of Blackwood. Here the air was chilled and antiseptic, a constant hum from the refrigeration units the only sound. It was a place of stark, clinical truth, where bodies told the stories their owners no longer could. Dr. Alistair Finch, the medical examiner, was a small, meticulous man who preferred the company of the dead to the living. They were, in his opinion, far more honest. "Well, Marcus," Finch said, sliding a set of X-rays onto the lightbox. The ghostly image of a human torso illuminated the dim room. "Your Warden Reed's overdose theory is, to put it politely, garbage." He tapped a finger on the delicate hyoid bone in the neck. "No fractures, which is common, but look here." He pointed to the deep tissue bruising on the slides under his microscope. Consistent with manual strangulation, slow, steady pressure, the petechiae on her eyelids confirmed it. She was asphyxiated. Vance absorbed the information, his jaw tight. Murder. It was what he suspected, but having it confirmed felt like a physical blow. He had seen the warden's dismissive attitude, heard the coded language. Now, he had proof that this wasn't just a tragic accident to be swept under the rug. "There's more," Finch said, his voice softening slightly. He hesitated, a rare sign of discomfort from the veteran ME. "I ran a full toxicology screen, standard procedure, no illicit narcotics, not a trace. But we did find something else during the internal exam." He slid another file across the stainless steel table. "Imani Jackson was pregnant, about 12 weeks along." The words hit Vance with the force of a battering ram. Pregnant, in a maximum security women's prison. A place where every movement, every interaction, was supposedly monitored and controlled. It wasn't just a murder anymore. It was a conspiracy of silence. This single fact transformed the case from a standard homicide into a ticking bomb, set to blow the carefully constructed facade of Blackwood Penitentiary sky high. "Were there any records of this at the prison?" Vance asked, already knowing the answer. "I called them myself," Finch confirmed. "Her medical file is clean. Not a single mention of a pregnancy test, a checkup, nothing. Either she was a medical miracle, or someone was deliberately keeping it off the books." Back in his car, the stale air felt suffocating. Vance's mind raced. A pregnant inmate is a massive liability for a prison. It means rules were broken. It means a guard, a staff member, someone with authority and access was involved. It provided a motive as old as time, a secret that someone would kill to protect. He drove back to the station, the city landscape a blur. His captain, a man named Miller, who had been on the force for 30 years, listened to Vance's update with a weary expression. Miller was a company man, a politician in a police uniform who valued clean reports over messy truths. "A pregnant inmate," Miller sighed, rubbing his temples. "Jesus, Vance, you realize what this means? The state is going to be all over this. The press will have a field day." Vance waited for the order to dig deeper, to get the resources he needed. Instead, Miller's tone shifted. "Listen, Marcus, tread carefully out there. Blackwood is Warden Reed's kingdom. She's got friends in the state capitol. The smart play here is to find the father, pin the murder on him. Maybe another inmate got jealous. Keep it simple. Don't go kicking over rocks you don't have to. It's a dead inmate, not the governor's daughter." The racial subtext was unspoken, but deafening. "Don't make waves. It's just one of them." The dismissiveness echoed Warden Reed's own words. For them, Imani Jackson was a problem to be managed, not a victim deserving of justice. Vance felt a familiar, bitter anger rise in his chest, but he kept his face a mask of neutrality. Understood, Captain. He started with the guards on the night shift. They were a closed-off bunch, their answers clipped in uniform. Everything was quiet, routine patrol, nothing unusual. But one of them, a young white guard named Caleb Thorne, was different. While the others projected a hardened indifference, Thorne was a bundle of raw nerves. His hands trembled as he held his coffee cup. He couldn't meet Vance's eyes, his gaze darting around the small interview room, as if looking for an escape route. "Officer Thorne," Vance began, his voice calm and disarming. "You were on patrol in C Block the night Imani Jackson died. Did you notice anything at all? Any sounds? Anyone who shouldn't have been there?" "No, sir, detective," Thorne stammered, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. It was just a regular night. Lights out at 11, all quiet." His answer was too quick, too rehearsed. He was sweating, despite the air conditioning blasting in the room. Vance saw the lie in the frantic pulse beating in Thorne's neck. "An inmate is dead, officer," Vance pressed gently, "and she was pregnant. That's not a regular night. That's a secret. And secrets have a way of taking people down with them." At the mention of the pregnancy, what little color Thorne had drained from his face. He looked like a ghost, his eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond the standard anxiety of a police interview. He opened his mouth to speak, then snapped it shut. He knew something. Vance was sure of it. But fear, a powerful, suffocating fear, was holding him silent. Before Vance could press further, Thorne stood abruptly. "I need a lawyer," he choked out, and practically fled the room. Vance watched him go, a sense of grim certainty settling over him. Caleb Thorne wasn't just a nervous guard. He was a part of the secret. And whatever he was so terrified of, it was likely the same thing that had cost Imani Jackson her life, and the life of her unborn child. The general population visiting room at Blackwood was a study in forced cheerfulness. Murals of pastoral landscapes, faded and peeling, failed to mask the oppressive atmosphere. It was a place where hope came to die, one monitored phone call at a time. Vance sat across a metal table from Keisha Williams, Imani Jackson's cellmate. She was a woman who had learned to survive by being invisible, her eyes perpetually downcast, her body language a fortress of self-preservation. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation was a dead end. Keisha offered clipped, one-word answers, her gaze fixed on her folded hands. She had seen nothing, heard nothing. Imani was quiet. They weren't close. Vance knew he was being stonewalled, but he also understood the fear behind it. In a place like Blackwood, talking to a cop was a death sentence. Snitches get stitches wasn't just a rhyme, it was policy. Vance decided to change tactics. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, shedding the official tone of a detective and adopting the familiarity of a shared experience. "Look, Keisha," he said softly, "I know how this works. I know what they think of us. The warden, the guards, they look at what happened to Imani and they see a file to be closed. An inconvenience. They don't see a person. They don't see a woman who had a family, who had a life." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I see it, and I'm not going to let them sweep her under the rug." For the first time, Keisha looked up. Her eyes, hard and guarded, met his. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the frustration, but she also saw a flicker of genuine resolve. She saw a black man in a position of power who hadn't forgotten where he came from. The fortress around her began to show a crack. "They won't protect you," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "They'll let you get hurt." "Maybe," Vance conceded, "but right now, I'm the only one trying to find out who killed your friend. Was she your friend, Keisha?" A single tear traced a path through the exhaustion on her face. She nodded, a small, jerky movement. She was good, smart. She didn't belong in here. The dam of her silence broke, and the story came flooding out in a torrent of hushed, fearful whispers. "She was seeing someone," Keisha said, her eyes darting around the room. "A guard, that young one Thorne." The name hit Vance with a jolt of confirmation. He was sweet on her, used to sneak her extra food, books from the outside. They'd meet in the laundry late at night. He promised her things. What kind of things? Vance pressed, keeping his voice low. A new life, Keisha breathed, the words full of a vicarious hope. He told her he loved her. He was gonna help her with her parole. He said he'd talk to his uncle, a lawyer or something. Imani, she actually believed him. She was happy. I ain't seen nobody happy in here for a long time. Then Keisha's expression darkened. About a month ago, she told me, about the baby. She looked at Vance, her eyes wide. She was so scared, but happy too. She said it was a sign, a chance to start over for real. She loved that baby more than anything already. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a tragic, damning picture. A forbidden romance, a secret pregnancy. It was a classic motive. Thorne, panicked at the thought of his career and life being destroyed, could have silenced her. It was a clean, simple narrative, exactly the kind Captain Miller wanted. But something about it felt too easy. The night she died, Vance prompted, did she say anything to you? Keisha leaned closer across the table, her voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. She was different that day, not just happy, she was electric, excited. She told me she found it. Found what? The key, Keisha said, her eyes burning with the memory. That's what she called it. I found the key, Keisha, the key to getting out of this whole mess. She said it wasn't just about parole anymore. She said she had proof that she never should have been in here in the first place. Something about her old case, something that would burn the whole system down. This was new. This changed everything. Imani's death might not have been about the baby, or not just about the baby. It was about something bigger, a secret she had unearthed that was far more dangerous than a forbidden affair. Did she say what this key was? Vance asked, his heart pounding. Keisha shook her head. No, she was scared, said it was too dangerous to talk about. She just said she had a meeting the next day, a meeting that was going to change everything. She looked at me, and she said, tomorrow, me and my baby are going to be free. She was so sure. Keisha's voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. But tomorrow never came. Vance sat back, the cheerful murals on the wall suddenly seeming like a cruel mockery. Imani Jackson hadn't just been a woman in love. She had been a woman on the verge of exposing a devastating truth. She hadn't been killed to cover up a simple affair. She had been silenced because she held a key. And Vance now knew, with chilling certainty, that whoever she was planning to expose was the same person who had crept into her cell in the dead of night and choked the life and the future out of her. The case had just become infinitely more complex and infinitely more dangerous. Armed with a new explosive direction, Vance's first move was to demand the prison's surveillance footage. Any official meeting, any movement in the corridors, it would all be on tape. The key Imani spoke of had to be connected to someone she'd interacted with, and the cameras would be the silent witnesses. He filed the official request, citing the ongoing homicide investigation. The response he got was a masterclass in bureaucratic obstruction. He was summoned back to Warden Reed's office. The space was as cold and imposing as the woman herself, dominated by a large mahogany desk and framed certificates of achievement. Reed sat behind the desk like a queen on her throne, her fingers steepled, her expression unreadable. "Detective Vance," she began, her tone dripping with feigned regret. "I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news regarding your request for the CCTV footage." She paused for dramatic effect. "Our entire system, as it happens, was down for scheduled maintenance on the night in question. A complete system-wide upgrade. It was offline for a full 72 hours. The lie was so bald-faced, so audacious, that Vance could only stare at her. A system-wide shutdown on the exact night an inmate is murdered in her cell? The odds were astronomical. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a cover-up. "Warden," Vance said, his voice dangerously low, "are you telling me that in a maximum security facility, there is not a single second of footage from the 24 hours surrounding a homicide?" "It is an unfortunate technical issue, Detective," Reed replied smoothly, her eyes never leaving his. "The work order was placed weeks ago, a matter of public record." She was daring him to challenge her, knowing he was wading through her territory, governed by her rules. Vance decided to push back, to show her he wasn't the gullible city cop she took him for. "Let's talk about another technical issues at Warden. How does an inmate in your facility end up 12 weeks pregnant? Is that also part of your scheduled maintenance? For a split second, the mask slipped. A muscle in Reed's jaw twitched, a flicker of raw anger in her eyes, but she recovered instantly, her voice turning to ice. Inmate Jackson, like many in our population, had a history of manipulative behavior. She was known to be promiscuous. It's not our job to police the private morality of our inmates, detective, only their compliance with facility rules. She leaned forward, the pretense of cooperation gone, replaced by a veiled threat. Frankly, I find your line of questioning, with its racial undertones, to be offensive. You seem to be implying a level of institutional failure that simply doesn't exist. Perhaps your time would be better spent investigating the other inmates, people from her own community. The racism was no longer subtext. It was a weapon, wielded to shut him down, to paint him as the aggressor. She was twisting his investigation into an attack on her authority and, by extension, the entire white power structure she represented. The blowback was immediate. No sooner had he returned to his car than his phone buzzed. It was Captain Miller. His voice was tight with fury. "What the hell are you doing, Vance? I just got off the phone with a state senator's aide. Warden Reed feels you're harassing her, that your investigation is racially motivated." "Racially motivated? Are you trying to get me fired?" "Captain, she's lying," Vance shot back, the frustration boiling over. "The security footage is gone. An inmate is pregnant and murdered. They're covering something up, and she's at the center of it." "I don't care what you think," Miller snarled. "I care about the political shitstorm you're about to rain down on this department. I gave you a direct order. Keep it simple. Find the boyfriend, close the case. You are officially warned, detective. One more complaint from that prison, and I'm pulling you from the case and sticking you on desk duty for a year. Am I clear?" The line went dead. Vance slammed his hand against the steering wheel, a wave of impotent rage washing over him. He was being boxed in. The system, the very one he had sworn to uphold, was actively working against him. Warden Reed wasn't just an obstacle. She was a gatekeeper, and she had powerful friends. She had successfully framed him as a rogue black cop with an agenda, using the very racism of the system as her shield. He was alone. The institution he worked for was demanding he back down. The institution he was investigating was daring him to come forward. Every official door was being slammed in his face. The message was clear. The truth about Imani Jackson's death was not welcome here. They had built a wall of silence around Blackwood, and they expected him to walk away. But as he sat there, the captain's threats echoing in his ears, Vance thought of Keisha's whispered words. "Tomorrow, me and my baby are going to be free." Imani had been fighting against this same wall. She had believed she could tear it down. They had silenced her to protect their secrets. Walking away now wouldn't just be failing a case. It would be letting them win. It would be proving that a black woman's life and her death didn't matter. He started the car, his knuckles white on the wheel. They had built a wall. Fine. He would find a way to smash right through it. The investigation had hit a brick wall, and the pressure from Captain Miller was a constant, suffocating weight. Vance's only viable lead, Officer Caleb Thorne, had vanished. He'd taken an emergency family leave the day after Vance's initial questioning and hadn't been seen since. His cell phone went straight to voicemail. He wasn't at his apartment. To Vance, it looked like a classic flight of a guilty man. The simple case Miller wanted was falling right into his lap. A love affair gone wrong. A panicked guard on the run. It was a neat, tidy box to put the whole messy affair in. But it felt wrong. Too easy. Days turned into a week. Vance was stuck chasing dead ends, feeling the case slip through his fingers. He was on the verge of being pulled, of having to write a report that named Thorne as the prime suspect and leave it at that. Another unsolved murder, another forgotten victim. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the unexpected happened. The front desk sergeant called his extension. "Vance, you've got a visitor. Says his name is Caleb Thorne. He's here to talk about the Blackwood case." Thorne sat in the stark, windowless interrogation room, looking like a ghost. He was thinner than Vance remembered, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. His uniform was gone, replaced by a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans. He looked less like a corrections officer and more like a scared kid who had seen something he could never unsee. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Thorne." Vance began, his voice neutral as he switched on the recorder. "We've been looking for you." "I know," Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper. I had to think. I couldn't stay here." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "I didn't kill her, Detective. You have to believe me. I loved her." The confession tumbled out of him, a torrent of fear, guilt, and grief. He admitted to the relationship, to the late-night meetings in the laundry, to the promises he'd made. "I know it was wrong," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I broke every rule in the book, but it wasn't just physical. I cared about her. She was smart and funny, and she saw the world in a way no one else did. She deserved better than that place." "Did you know she was pregnant?" Vance asked quietly. Thorne nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "She told me a few weeks before she died. She was terrified, but I was happy. Scared to death, but happy. We made plans. I was going to request a transfer. We were going to find a place, start over. I swear to you, Detective, that baby was my future." His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. Vance let him compose himself before pressing on. "If you didn't kill her, why did you run?" "Because I was scared!" Thorne's head snapped up, his eyes wild with fear. "I was the last one to see her alive. Don't you get it? We met that night, around 10. She was so excited. She was practically vibrating. She told me she'd found it." The word hung in the air. "Found what?" Vance asked, leaning forward. "Proof," Thorne said. "Proof that she was framed in her original case. She said she was just a secretary, that she took the fall for a massive fraud scheme. She said the real crooks were the people she worked for. She found some documents, copies of wire transfers or something, that she said would prove it." A new name entered the equation, one that sent a chill down Vance's spine. "Who did she work for?" "A high-powered law firm in Atlanta," Thorne said. "Prescott & Associates. She said her own lawyer, the one who told her to plead guilty to a lesser charge, was the one who set her up. His name was Richard Prescott. Richard Prescott, son of Harrison Prescott, a powerful and untouchable state senator. The case had just jumped from a prison scandal to the highest levels of political power in Georgia. The wall of silence around Blackwood suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. It wasn't just about protecting a corrupt warden, it was about protecting a political dynasty. "She told me she was going to use the proof to get her conviction overturned," Thorne continued, his voice trembling. "She had a meeting set up for the next day to give the documents to someone she trusted. She said, 'They won't be able to ignore me anymore.' When I left her that night, she was alive and well. I went back to my post. The next morning, they found her." He looked at Vance, his face a mask of desperation. "Someone found out what she had. They killed her to shut her up. And I knew they'd try to pin it on me. The secret boyfriend, the baby. It's the perfect story. So I ran. I didn't know what else to do." Vance studied the young guard's face, searching for a hint of deception. All he saw was genuine terror and heartbreak. Thorne's story was incredible, but it fit the pieces. It explained Keisha's story about the key. It explained Amani's excitement. And it explained why the system was fighting him so hard at every turn. He wasn't investigating a simple murder. He was standing at the edge of a conspiracy that reached into the heart of the state's political elite. Caleb Thorne wasn't the killer. He was the intended scapegoat. And Amani Jackson hadn't been killed by a panicked lover. She had been executed by an enemy who was powerful, ruthless, and had everything to lose. Walking into the offices of Prescott & Associates was like stepping into another dimension. The gritty, oppressive reality of Blackwood was replaced by the hushed, rarefied air of old money and untouchable power. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off polished marble floors and dark mahogany furniture. It was a world built to intimidate, to remind visitors of their place. Richard Prescott fit the world perfectly. He was handsome in a way that seemed genetically engineered, with a politician's smile, perfectly coiffed hair, and a suit that cost more than Vance's car. He greeted the detective with a handshake that was firm and confident, his blue eyes radiating a practiced charm. "Detective Vance," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Please, have a seat. My assistant said this was about the tragic death of a former client, Amani Jackson. A terrible business. I was so sorry to hear about it. He settled into his high-backed leather chair, the picture of concerned professionalism. Vance felt like he was in a chess match with a grandmaster. Every move had to be calculated. We're exploring all aspects of Ms. Jackson's life, Mr. Prescott, including the case that led to her incarceration. You were her defense attorney, correct? I was, Richard confirmed with a solemn nod. It was a sad case. Imani was a bright woman, but she fell in with the wrong crowd, made some poor choices. My firm was the victim of her fraud, but my father, he gestured vaguely, as if to the Capitol building itself, believes in second chances. He insisted we provide her with the best possible defense. I managed to get her a plea deal that significantly reduced her sentence. We tried to help her. The narrative was flawless. He was the benevolent savior, the compassionate lawyer who had done his best for a fallen woman. He was already spinning the story, controlling the frame. We have information, Vance said, watching Richard's face for any reaction, that Ms. Jackson believed she was framed, that she had uncovered evidence to that effect and was planning to use it to overturn her conviction. Richard's expression didn't flicker. He simply raised a well-manicured eyebrow. Detective, with all due respect, that's a common fantasy among inmates. The "I was framed" defense. It's a coping mechanism. Imani was facing years behind bars. It's not surprising she might invent a story that made her the victim. It's truly tragic what desperation can do to the mind. He delivered the lines with a sincerity that was chillingly convincing. He wasn't just lying, he was performing. Vance pressed on. She had a meeting scheduled for the day after she died, a meeting to present this evidence. Do you know anything about that? I'm afraid not, Richard said, shaking his head. Our professional relationship ended after her sentencing. I haven't had contact with her since. It was time to apply pressure. Where were you on the night of September 18th, Mr. Prescott, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.? The question hung in the air. For the first time, a flicker of something other than calm condescension appeared in Richard's eyes, a brief flash of irritation, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He leaned back in his chair and smiled, a tight, confident little smile that didn't reach his eyes. As a matter of fact, Detective, I have a rather solid alibi. I was at the governor's annual charity gala. I was a keynote speaker. My speech was at 10:30 p.m. I stayed until well after 1 a.m., shaking hands, talking with constituents. There were over 300 people there, including my father, Senator Prescott, half the state legislature, and a dozen members of the press. I'm sure any one of them would be happy to vouch for me. It was a checkmate, a perfect ironclad, high-profile alibi. There was no way a man could be in the public eye at a major political event and simultaneously be in a locked cell in a prison 2 hours away. Vance felt a surge of frustration. Richard was toying with him. He was untouchable, and he knew it. He had the power, the connections, and the perfect alibi. Thank you for your time, Mr. Prescott, Vance said, rising from his chair. The mask of professionalism was back on. Of course, Detective, Richard said, standing to show him out. As they reached the door, he placed a hand on Vance's shoulder, a gesture of faux camaraderie. A word of friendly advice, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. You're a good cop. Don't waste your career chasing ghosts down a rabbit hole. This case, it's a tragedy, but it's a simple one. A prison affair gone wrong. The young guard Thorne is your man. Focus on him. It's the smart play. The words were almost identical to Captain Miller's. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. The system was speaking with one voice, telling him to back off. As Vance walked out of the opulent office and back into the real world, the truth hit him with sickening clarity. Richard Prescott wasn't just a suspect. He was the puppet master. He had an alibi because he hadn't needed to be there. He was powerful enough to have someone else do his dirty work for him. The question was, who? And how could Vance possibly prove it when the entire weight of the state's political machine was aligned against him? The case was stalled. Richard Prescott was protected by a fortress of political influence and a seemingly unbreakable alibi. Warden Reed was a wall of denial. Caleb Thorne was a scared kid with a story that sounded like a conspiracy theory. Vance was running out of time and options. Captain Miller was breathing down his neck, demanding he close the case and file a report naming Thorne as the killer. But Vance couldn't shake the image of Imani Jackson's cell. the unnatural tidiness, the perfectly made bed. It was a scene that had been scrubbed, sanitized. Forensics had come up empty. The cell was wiped clean of any trace evidence, any DNA that didn't belong to Imani or her cellmate. It was too clean. The killer hadn't just been careful. They had been professional. Vance pored over the crime scene photos again and again, his frustration mounting. There had to be something they missed, something small. An idea began to form in his mind, a long shot born of desperation. He'd worked with the department's K-9 unit on a narcotics case once. He remembered the handler talking about the dog's capabilities, how they could be trained to detect not just drugs or explosives, but specific chemical compounds, accelerants, cadaverine, even certain cleaning agents. If the killer had used something to clean the scene, something to erase their presence, maybe, just maybe, a dog could find what the human eye could not. Getting the warrant was a battle. It was an unorthodox request, and the department was hesitant to approve the resources for what they considered a dead-end case. But Vance was persistent, calling in a favor from an assistant DA who owed him one. Finally, he got the green light. He returned to Blackwood, this time with Officer Miller and his partner, a formidable-looking German shepherd named Shadow. Warden Reed watched their arrival from her office window, her expression a mask of pure contempt. The presence of the dog was an escalation, a clear signal that Vance was not backing down. The cell had been sealed since the initial investigation. As the door swung open, the air inside was stale and still. Vance watched as the handler, a woman named Corporal Davis, gave Shadow the command. "Seek." The dog entered the cell, its movements low and methodical. Its nose twitched, sampling the air, its powerful senses decoding a world of scent invisible to the humans in the room. Shadow swept the small space, the bunk, the toilet, the small metal desk. Nothing. It sniffed around the floor where Imani's body had been found. Still nothing. Vance's heart sank. It had been a long shot, and it seemed it wasn't going to pay off. Corporal Davis was about to call off the search when Shadow suddenly froze. Its head cocked, its nose pointed towards the wall near the small, grated ventilation shaft. It was a section of the wall the forensics team had barely glanced at, just old, painted cinder blocks. Shadow whined, a low, insistent sound, and began scratching at the wall, its claws making a sharp, scraping noise against the concrete. "What is it, boy?" Davis murmured, kneeling beside him. Shadow let out a sharp, definitive bark, refusing to move from the spot. "He's alerting on something," Davis announced, her voice tight with excitement. "A chemical trace. Strong." Vance moved in closer. He ran his hand over the wall. It looked and felt like every other part of the cell. But as he examined the mortar between two of the cinder blocks, he saw it. A tiny hairline crack, almost invisible to the naked eye. It looked like the mortar had been disturbed, carefully chipped away, and then inexpertly replaced. "Get me a pry bar and a collection kit," Vance ordered. A guard returned with the tools. Carefully, Vance inserted the tip of the pry bar into the crack and leveraged it. The old mortar crumbled away, revealing a small, dark cavity inside the cinder block. It was a space no bigger than a shoebox, a perfect hidden compartment. The smell hit them immediately, a sharp, acrid chemical odor. It was the scent Shadow had detected, the faint, lingering residue of an industrial-grade cleaning solvent, the kind used to dissolve organic material and erase forensic evidence. It was a chemical not authorized for use anywhere in the prison. Someone had used this hidden space and tried to scrub it clean. Reaching into the darkness with a gloved hand, Vance's fingers brushed against something smooth and cool. He pulled it out. It was a small, spiral-bound notebook, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. It had been sealed inside a clear plastic Ziploc bag, protecting it from the elements. As Vance held the notebook in his hand, a profound silence fell over the cell. This was it. This was the key Keisha had talked about. This was the proof Imani had died to protect. Shadow had found more than just a chemical scent. He had unearthed a voice from beyond the grave, and Vance knew, with absolute certainty, that the words written on the pages of that small, cheap notebook were about to tear the state of Georgia's political world apart. Back in the sterile quiet of his office, the city lights twinkling like distant, indifferent stars, Vance opened the plastic bag. The small notebook felt heavier than it should, weighted with the secrets that had cost a woman her life. He opened it carefully, the cheap paper crinkling under his touch. The handwriting inside was neat, precise, the script of a woman who had spent her life dealing with details. It was Imani Jackson's final testament. The early entries were a chronicle of despair, detailing the soul-crushing monotony of prison life. But then, about a year in, the tone began to shift. It started with Richard Prescott. October 12th. Richard visited today. Not as my lawyer. He says he feels guilty about what happened. He says he wants to help me. He still has that smile that can make you believe anything. I know I shouldn't trust him. I know what he's capable of. But when he looks at me, I remember the man I thought I knew before all this. Before he asked me to make one little change to the accounting ledger. Just a temporary fix, he said. The entries painted a damning picture. Imani wasn't just a secretary who had committed fraud. She had been Richard Prescott's lover. He had seduced her, manipulated her, and then used her as a pawn in a sophisticated money laundering scheme, moving money for his father's political campaigns through the firm's accounts. When an audit loomed, he had convinced her to take the fall, promising a short sentence and his undying support. He had framed her, using her love and trust as weapons against her. January 5th, he's been sending money to my commissary account. Small amounts through a prisoner aid fund that I know doesn't exist. It's hush money. He's scared of what I know. He should be. I was his scapegoat, but I wasn't stupid. I made copies before I shredded the originals. I always knew this day might come. Vance felt a surge of adrenaline. The copies. This was the proof Thorne had mentioned. But the diary held an even darker secret, one that went far beyond financial crimes. Imani, with her sharp accountant's mind, had started noticing patterns inside Blackwood. March 22nd. The laundry delivery van. It comes every Tuesday like clockwork. But it doesn't always carry laundry. Sometimes the boxes are heavier. They are labeled medical supplies. Warden Reed meets the driver herself. The boxes go straight to her office, not the infirmary. I saw her with him once through her office window. The driver. A man everyone calls the senator's man. An envelope passed from his hand to hers. This place isn't just a prison. It's a distribution hub. It was a conspiracy of breathtaking audacity. Under the protection of Senator Harrison Prescott, Warden Reed was using Blackwood as a transit point for a major drug trafficking operation, smuggling narcotics in under the guise of medical supplies. Imani hadn't just been a threat to Richard's reputation. She had stumbled upon the entire criminal enterprise that funded his family's political dynasty. Then came the entries about Caleb Thorne, filled with a cautious, blossoming hope. He was her escape, a genuine connection in a world of lies, and then the discovery that would seal her fate. August 14th. I can't believe it. I'm pregnant. I should be terrified, but all I feel is this fierce, protective love. It's Caleb's. It has to be a sign, a reason to fight, a reason to get out of here and start over. I have to tell him. But the final entry, dated the night she was murdered, was the one that made the blood run cold in Vance's veins. It was written in a rushed, almost frantic script. September 18th. He knows. I don't know how, but Richard knows about the baby. He called, arranged a visit, tonight. He's coming here, registered as my attorney. He thinks he can scare me, buy my silence. He thinks I'm still the naive girl who fell for his lies. He doesn't know about Caleb. And he doesn't know what I'm about to tell him. He thinks this is his child. And he doesn't know that I found the final piece of the puzzle, the original wire transfer orders with his signature on them, hidden in the prison's archaic accounting archive. I have everything. Tomorrow, I show it all to my new lawyer. Richard thinks he's coming here to trap me, but he's the one walking into a trap. Tomorrow, I will be free, and his entire family will be brought to ruin. Either he helps me walk out that front gate, or I burn his entire world to the ground. Vance closed the diary, his hands trembling slightly. It was all there, the motive, the means, the conspiracy. Imani had brilliantly played her last desperate hand. She had used Richard's own monstrous ego against him, luring him to the prison by claiming his paternity, intending to blackmail him into securing her freedom. But she had fatally underestimated his ruthlessness. He hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to erase his mistake. The perfect alibi at the governor's gala. It was a sham. He hadn't needed to be there. but the diary proved he was there, in that prison, on that night. Imani Jackson herself had become the star witness to her own murder. Now, Vance just had to make her voice heard. The diary was a stick of dynamite, and Vance was ready to light the fuse. He walked into Captain Miller's office, slapped the bagged notebook on his desk, and laid out the entire conspiracy. The affair, the frame-up, the drug running, the blackmail, and the murder. He expected shock, perhaps even a reluctant commendation. What he got was a wall of cold, hard fear. Miller read the summary Vance had prepared, his face growing paler with every word. He didn't look at Vance. He stared at the name Senator Harrison Prescott, as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. "You can't touch this, Marcus," Miller said, his voice a low, panicked whisper. "Do you have any idea who you're talking about? Harrison Prescott basically runs this state. He makes and breaks careers, judges, DAs, police chiefs. They're all in his pocket. He's a drug trafficker, and his son is a murderer," Vance countered, his voice ringing with conviction. "We have the victim's own words. It's enough for a warrant." "It's a diary from a convicted felon," Miller shot back, his voice rising. "Prescott's lawyers will shred it. They'll say she was a delusional, scorned lover. They'll paint you as a cop with a vendetta. They will ruin you, and they will ruin this department. I am ordering you to stand down." "I can't do that, Captain. This isn't a request." Miller slammed his fist on the desk. "Give me the diary. The case is closed. Thorne is our man. End of story." Vance looked at his captain, a man he had once respected, and saw nothing but a bureaucrat terrified of losing his pension. Without another word, Vance picked up the diary, turned his back on Miller, and walked out. He had just committed career suicide, but he didn't care. He went over Miller's head, directly to the district attorney's office, presenting his case to an assistant DA he thought he could trust. The ADA, a man named Harris, listened intently, his expression grim. He promised to take it to a judge immediately to get a warrant for Richard Prescott's arrest. For a few hours, Vance felt a surge of hope. The system might work after all. The hope was short-lived. The call came late that afternoon. The warrant request had been denied. The judge, a man named Peterson, known for his close ties to the Prescott family, had ruled the diary inadmissible as unsubstantiated hearsay. The door had been slammed shut. The system had closed ranks. Defeated, Vance drove home through the deepening twilight. The city felt hostile, its lights mocking him. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone rang. It was an unlisted number. He answered, expecting another tirade from Miller. "Detective Vance?" The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a voice that carried an unmistakable weight of federal authority. "Who is this?" Vance asked. "That's not important," the voice replied. "What's important is that you stop, immediately. Your investigation into the Prescott family is interfering with a multi-year federal RICO investigation. We have been building a case against the senator's entire operation for a long time. You are a blip on the radar, a clumsy local cop who is about to spook our targets and blow our entire case." Vance was stunned into silence. The feds. They had been watching the whole time. "We know about the diary," the voice continued. "We know about Warden Reed. We know everything. But this is bigger than one dead inmate. This is about dismantling a criminal empire. Your little murder investigation is a complication we don't need. So, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back to your office, you're going to file your report naming Caleb Thorne as the primary suspect, and you're going to walk away. If you don't, we will make sure your career in law enforcement is over. We will leak your unsubstantiated evidence to the press, and the Prescott machine will sue you into oblivion for defamation. We, on the other hand, will deny we ever had this conversation. Are we clear?" The line went dead. Vance stood in his driveway, the phone still pressed to his ear, feeling a cold dread seep into his bones. He was completely and utterly alone. He was fighting a war on two fronts. On one side was a corrupt state political machine determined to bury the truth. On the other was a clandestine federal investigation that saw Imani Jackson not as a victim, but as an acceptable piece of collateral damage. Both sides, for their own reasons, wanted him to fail. Both sides were content to let an innocent man take the fall for a murder he didn't commit. He was caught in the crossfire, A single powerless detective against two massive invisible players who were moving pieces on a board he couldn't even see. Any move he made was the wrong one. Obeying Miller meant letting a killer go free. Pushing forward meant career annihilation and likely personal destruction. He had the truth in his hands, a truth that was now so toxic it felt like it was burning a hole right through his pocket. Trapped between the state's corruption and the Fed's cold calculus, Vance knew that playing by the rules was a losing game. The system wasn't just broken, it was actively hostile. If he was going to get justice for Imani Jackson, he would have to break the game. He had one card left to play, one piece on the board that was vulnerable. The weakest link in the chain, Warden Evelyn Reed. He couldn't get a warrant for Prescott, but Reed was different. The diary detailed her direct involvement in the drug smuggling operation. It was enough. He spent the night drafting an arrest warrant, not for murder, but for conspiracy to distribute narcotics and racketeering. He bypassed Miller and the Prescott-friendly judges, taking it to an old-school, no-nonsense magistrate on the night shift, a woman who owed her position to no one. She read the affidavit, looked at the excerpts from the diary, and signed it without a word. The next morning, Vance walked into Blackwood Penitentiary, not as a visiting detective, but as an arresting officer. He strode past the stunned guards directly into Evelyn Reed's office. She was on the phone, barking orders. When she saw him, her face contorted in a sneer of contempt. "Detective, I thought I made it clear you are no longer welcome." "Evelyn Reed," Vance said, his voice cutting through her tirade like a shard of glass. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to distribute a controlled substance." He laid the warrant on her polished mahogany desk. The color drained from her face. The mask of untouchable authority shattered, replaced by raw, unfiltered shock. For a moment, she was speechless. The two guards who had accompanied Vance moved to stand behind her. Her kingdom was crumbling around her. "This is insane," she finally sputtered, her voice trembling with rage. "This is a fabrication. You have no proof." "I have Imani Jackson's diary," Vance said calmly. She kept very detailed notes about the Tuesday laundry deliveries, about the boxes of medical supplies, about the envelopes of cash you received from the senator's man. She documented your entire operation. In the interrogation room, stripped of her tailored suit and her authority, Evelyn Reed was a different woman. The granite facade had crumbled, revealing a brittle, terrified person underneath. She tried to bluff, to threaten, to call her powerful friends. But Vance held firm. "Your friends can't help you now, Warden," he said, his voice quiet but relentless. "Senator Prescott will cut you loose. He will paint you as a rogue employee, the sole architect of this scheme. He will sacrifice you to save himself. Richard will let you take the fall. They will feed you to the wolves to protect their empire. You will spend the rest of your life in a cell, probably in this very prison, and they will not think of you once. Or you can help yourself. You can tell me the truth." He let the words hang in the air. He could see the war raging in her eyes. Years of loyalty to the Prescotts, battling against the primal instinct of self-preservation. Finally, self-preservation won. A single tear cut a path down her cheek. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The system was in place long before I got here. They gave me the job with the understanding that I would facilitate. I was a manager, that's all." "I don't care about the drugs right now," Vance said, leaning in. "I care about what happened to Imani Jackson. Tell me about Richard Prescott's visit." Reed's story came out in a broken, halting confession. "Richard called me that afternoon. He was panicked. He said Imani was trying to blackmail him, that she was unstable. He said he was coming that night, as her lawyer, to calm her down. He told me to have the infirmary give her a sedative, a strong one. He said she was a threat to herself." "So you ordered the nurse to drug her," Vance stated, the pieces clicking into place. Reed nodded miserably. "I thought he was just going to talk to her, scare her a little. I swear, I never thought he would kill her." This was it, the direct link, but it was still her word against his. He needed more. "The security cameras," Vance said. "You told me they were down for maintenance. That was a lie, wasn't it?" She hesitated, then gave a slow, defeated nod. "Richard ordered me to wipe the servers, but I didn't. Not all of them." A flicker of cunning returned to her eyes. "I've worked for men like the Prescotts my whole life. You always keep an insurance policy. She explained that the main server had been wiped, but the system automatically created a deep archive backup on a separate off-site server, a failsafe that only she and the system administrator knew about. She had left that one untouched. "I'll give you the access codes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll testify against him, in exchange for a deal." Vance didn't make any promises. He left her in the interrogation room and made a call. An hour later, a police tech specialist was in front of a computer, typing in the codes Reed had provided. They watched as the archive files loaded. And there it was. The footage was grainy, time-stamped at 10:47 p.m. on the night of the murder. It showed a corridor in C block. A figure appeared, dressed in a dark suit. He was being escorted by a guard. The man in the suit turned his head toward the camera for a moment, his handsome features clearly visible under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was Richard Prescott, inside the secure cell block, hours after his keynote speech at the governor's gala, miles from his perfect ironclad alibi. The insurance policy had just paid out. The queen had been captured, but in falling, she had exposed the king. The dam broke. With Evelyn Reed's full confession, the damning diary, and the irrefutable video evidence of Richard Prescott inside the cell block, the invisible walls protecting the Prescott dynasty crumbled. The federal agents who had been watching from the shadows were forced to accelerate their timeline. They could no longer treat the murder of Imani Jackson as a peripheral issue. It was now the linchpin that could unravel their entire RICO case. The arrests came at dawn, coordinated raids executed with the swift, overwhelming force of the federal government. Vance stood on a quiet, tree-lined street in Atlanta's most affluent neighborhood, watching as FBI agents swarmed the stately mansion of Senator Harrison Prescott. A few miles away, another team breached the sleek modern law offices of Prescott and Associates, taking a stunned Richard Prescott into custody in front of his horrified staff. The empire had fallen. Confronted with the video, Richard's smooth, confident facade finally cracked. But it wasn't remorse that emerged. It was a chilling, narcissistic rage. In a fit of arrogance, believing his father's influence could still save him, he confessed everything. "She was a loose end," he spat, his voice dripping with venom as he sat across from Vance in the same interrogation room where Caleb Thorne had wept. "A stupid girl who got greedy. She threatened to ruin everything. My career, my father's legacy, our family's name. She thought she could leverage a baby against me, my baby. She was a mistake that needed to be erased." He described with cold detachment how he had slipped into her cell after the sedative had taken hold, how she had been sleeping, helpless. He had pressed the pillow over her face, holding it there until her body went still. "I was protecting my future," he said, as if it were the most reasonable explanation in the world. He showed no remorse, only annoyance that he had been caught. The fallout was seismic. The Prescott conspiracy case became the biggest political scandals in Georgia's history. Senator Harrison Prescott, Judge Peterson, and a dozen other officials were indicted on federal racketeering and corruption charges. Their trials would dominate the news for months. For the people at the heart of the case, justice, or some form of it, was served. Caleb Thorne was officially cleared of any involvement in the murder, though he was dishonorably discharged from the Department of Corrections for his relationship with an inmate. He left the state, a young man broken by a love he wasn't allowed to have. Keisha Williams, for her cooperation, was granted early parole. She walked out of Blackwood a free woman, carrying the memory of the friend who had dared to fight back. Warden Evelyn Reed, in exchange for her testimony, received a reduced sentence. Richard Prescott, staring down a mountain of evidence, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 3 months after the verdict, Vance found himself in a quiet, sun-dappled corner of a modest cemetery on the south side of Atlanta. He stood before a simple, flat gravestone, freshly laid. The inscription was sparse: Imani Jackson, beloved daughter. There was no mention of the child she carried, the future that had been stolen from them both. He placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the grass. "We got him, Imani," he said quietly to the silence. "It's over." But as he stood there, a profound sense of melancholy settled over him. Justice had been served, yes. The guilty were punished, the corrupt were exposed, but it was a victory that rang hollow. It couldn't bring Imani back. It couldn't give her child a chance to live. Her fight for freedom had only been won in death, her story told only after she was silenced. He was promoted, put in charge of a new public integrity unit, tasked with rooting out the very corruption he had exposed. His career was made, but the case had changed him. It had stripped away his remaining illusions about the system he served. The lesson wasn't that the system was broken, but that sometimes it works exactly as it was designed to protect the powerful, to insulate the wealthy, and to treat the lives of the marginalized as disposable. Imani Jackson was never meant to win. Her tragedy was that she was a brilliant, courageous woman, trapped in a narrative that had already been written for her by men like Richard Prescott. Vance's victory wasn't in fixing that system. It was in refusing to accept its narrative. It was in listening to a whisper in a prison visiting room, trusting a scared young guard, and believing in the words of a dead woman. Justice, he realized, is not a guarantee handed down by institutions. It's a fight, waged one case at a time, often in the dark against overwhelming odds by those who refuse to let the silenced stay silent. It was a marathon, not a sprint. And as he walked away from Imani's grave, leaving her to her long overdue peace, he knew his race was far from over.